Well, yeah, it's really, really shocking, this. Basically now they have put in this system whereby pre-sentencing reports, which basically automatically take into account your race, your gender, your circumstance, all of that to mitigate the sentences that you might get for whatever crime you're alleged to have committed and been brought before the courts and convicted of. That now means essentially that white Britons are going to get the worst treatment when it comes to sentencing.
For years, the UK has been a symbol of liberty and justice, a beacon of fairness in a world often marred by injustice. But now, something is changing, and not for the better. J.D. Vance, a fierce critic of today's political landscape, has sounded the alarm, warning that the UK is veering dangerously away from its founding principles. And he's not alone. Across the UK, a growing number of voices are echoing his concerns, frustrated by the direction their country is heading. The legal system, once a pillar of impartiality, is now undergoing a dramatic transformation. New sentencing guidelines are in place, guidelines that factor in race, gender, and background when determining punishment. This change has ignited a fierce debate. Some argue it's a necessary step to correct historical wrongs, while others see it as a dangerous erosion of fairness and equality before the law. But this isn't the first time J.D. Vance has raised his voice in alarm. His previous critiques of the UK's open border policies have struck a chord with many Brits who feel their country is losing control over its own future. Now, with justice itself seemingly up for negotiation based on identity politics, the stakes have never been higher. The question is, what's next for the UK, and who will pay the price?
Is the two-tier justice system. This is why they call Keir Starmer two-tier Keir. And I'll tell you something, guys, but the other point...
Even Keir Starmer recognises what a catastrophe this is.
Yeah.
Disappointed in this response, and the Lord Chancellor is obviously continuing to engage on this, and we're considering our response, and all options are on the table, but I am disappointed at this outcome, and now we'll have to consider what we do as a result.
Oh, I don't know, if only there was a Prime Minister who cared about the issue could do something. You're the Prime Minister, Keir. I mean, he's acting like he's just some dude off the street who's a little bit aggrieved.
Now, let's turn our attention to Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, and his role in this unfolding crisis. The UK's new sentencing system has ignited a firestorm of controversy with its inclusion of race, gender, and personal background in pre-sentencing reports. On the surface, it's pitched as a step toward correcting historical inequalities, but beneath that, the concerns are growing darker by the day. This system raises a critical question. Is the justice system truly blind? Critics, including J.D. Vance, argue that it's not. Instead, it's being distorted by factors that have no place in determining punishment. While some claim that individuals from minority groups might receive more lenient sentences, others argue that white Britons are facing disproportionately harsh penalties for the same crimes. This has led to a growing fear. The UK's justice system is no longer based on equality. Instead, it's creating a two-tier system where your sentence depends more on who you are than what you've done. For those like J.D. Vance, this is more than just a debate. It's an attack on the very foundation of fairness in the law. How can justice be served when the scales are tipped by identity politics? It's a chilling shift, and it leaves many wondering, is true justice even possible anymore?
Ridiculous. But James, the reality is what they have literally done is brought in laws whereby if you are any of those identity politics groups, women, gays, of ethnic whatever origin, anything other than a white man must be treated more leniently. So by definition, white men will be treated harsher under the British legal system.
And we'll just be really frank about what we're talking about here. We're talking about, basically people of color, people of different religions getting a lighter sentence and a lighter treatment. And so this means, a lot of migrants who might commit crime, they're going to get a lighter treatment than somebody who is a Briton committing the same crime. That's shocking. Keir Starmer, I don't trust anything he has said there about claiming that he's distressed about that, because, this is the same guy who saw his opinion numbers absolutely plummet and then started talking about, oh, maybe we have to do something about immigration. Really, Keir? Really? Okay, fine. Now you tell us.
Keir Starmer recently claimed that free speech is thriving in the UK, but J.D. Vance wasn't buying it, and he wasted no time dismantling that illusion. Vance pointed out a hard truth. Free speech in the UK is increasingly under attack, and the government is using laws like hate speech legislation to tighten the noose. While Starmer tries to paint a rosy picture of freedom and open discourse, the reality is far darker. These laws are not being used to protect society. They're being weaponized to silence anyone who dares to challenge the status quo. Vance argues that Starmer is either blissfully unaware of these growing restrictions or, worse yet, turning a blind eye for political advantage. The problem isn't just the rise of hate speech laws, it's the dangerous blurring of lines between harmful speech and mere opinion. What once was a nation that prided itself on robust debate is now a place where expressing a contrary view can lead to punishment. Vance's criticism cuts to the core. The UK's legal system is eroding the fundamental right to free expression. And Starmer, he seems more than willing to ignore it, leaving many to wonder what kind of country the UK is becoming.
The thing, too, the other week, there was that phenomenal speech that J.D. Vance gave at the European Union, where he called out Britain, and he called out Europe, but he called out Britain in particular and said that Britain, which was a bastion of liberty, has no longer become that, and they are straying very far away from that. And the real point is that if America is going to go and defend liberal democracies, and you want to be defended, you've got to act like a liberal democracy. And Britain has strayed so far from the centuries. It took centuries for Britain to develop the traditions of law and liberty that we enjoy as well. And now they're torching them at a rate of knots.
Under the new identity-based sentencing guidelines in the UK, a disturbing trend is emerging. White Britons are set to face harsher sentences than others. The law now factors in race, gender, and background when determining punishment, allowing these personal characteristics to influence the severity of someone's sentence. While proponents of these policies argue they're designed to address historical inequalities, the reality is much darker. By treating people differently based on their identity, the system is chipping away at one of the bedrock principles of justice. Equality before the law. The idea that justice should be blind, impartially applied to all, regardless of who they are, is being systematically undermined. For many, this shift feels like a betrayal. The legal system, once focused on holding individuals accountable for their actions, now appears more concerned with rewarding or punishing based on race or gender. Instead of fostering unity, these policies breed division, and in doing so, they erode the very foundation of fairness that the justice system was built to uphold.
This undermines the most basic principle of our justice system. That justice is blind, that everyone's equal under the law, that you're not going to get preferential treatment based on who you are. And we already see it happening even before this formal recognition that it's happening. We have seen it over and over again with people getting ridiculously lenient sentences and then having people in the UK locked up for being in an anti-immigration protest, even if they weren't guilty of anything that was approaching violence, but they were at a violent protest, so they were guilty by association. Same thing doesn't happen with these pro-Palestinian.
Under the new sentencing guidelines, a disturbing trend is taking shape. Migrants and minorities may receive more lenient sentences than others. With factors like race and background now weighing in on punishment, certain groups could face lighter sentences than their counterparts for the same crimes. While some argue that this is an effort to correct historical wrongs, many view it as nothing more than preferential treatment that undermines true fairness. Critics warn that this shift creates a justice system where some people are treated more favorably simply because of their identity, not their actions. The consequences of this are far-reaching. It threatens to tear at the fabric of social cohesion, fueling feelings of resentment and unfairness. When people see that justice isn't being applied equally to all, trust in the system begins to crumble. The idea that justice should be blind, impartially delivered to everyone, is slipping away, and with it, the unity that holds society together. The long-term impact could be profound, with divisions deepening and societal trust eroding. The very foundation of fairness and equality could be at risk.
Most concerningly, I look to our very dear friends, the United Kingdom, where the backslide away from conscience rights has placed the basic liberties of religious Britons in particular in the crosshairs. A little over 2 years ago, the British government charged Adam Smith Connor, a 51-year-old physiotherapist and an Army veteran, with the heinous crime of standing 50 meters from an abortion clinic and silently praying for 3 minutes. Not obstructing anyone, not interacting with anyone, just silently praying on his own. And after British law enforcement spotted him and demanded to know what he was praying for, Adam replied simply, it was on behalf of the unborn son he and his former girlfriend had aborted years before. Now, the officers were not moved. Adam was found guilty of breaking the government's new buffer zones law, which criminalizes silent prayer and other actions that could influence a person's decision within 200 meters of an abortion facility. He was sentenced to pay thousands of pounds in legal costs to the prosecution. Now, I wish I could say that this was a fluke, a one-off crazy example of a badly written law being enacted against a single person. But no, this last October, just a few months ago, the Scottish government began distributing letters to citizens whose houses lay within so-called safe access zones, warning them that even private prayer within their own homes may amount to breaking the law. Naturally, the government urged readers to report any fellow citizens suspected guilty of thought crime. In Britain and across Europe, free speech, I fear, is in retreat.
Keir Starmer's stance on immigration and border control has been anything but steady. One moment he advocates for more open borders and lenient policies, and the next he shifts his position, desperately trying to keep pace with changing public opinion. This flip-flopping has left many questioning his credibility on an issue that is critical to the UK's future. JD Vance, in particular, hasn't held back in his criticism of Starmer's lack of a clear, consistent stance. Vance accuses Starmer of playing a dangerous political game, attempting to please both sides without ever truly addressing the real concerns of the British public. According to Vance, Starmer's position is dangerously out of touch with the everyday citizens who are genuinely worried about the impact of uncontrolled immigration on jobs, public services, and national security. But instead of addressing these legitimate concerns, Starmer seems to be pandering to activists, ignoring the voices of the broader public in favor of political expediency. For many, this inconsistency paints Starmer as disconnected, out of sync with the very people he claims to represent. His inability to take a firm, principled stand only fuels the perception that he's more interested in political maneuvering than actually tackling the issues that matter.
They weren't guilty of anything that was approaching violence, but they were at a violent protest, so they were guilty by association. Same thing doesn't happen with these pro-Palestinian protests. That's right. A very different approach. So we have seen it over and over again. And we're not immune from it. It's happening right here.
Well, I was going to say we are not immune from it, and where Britain goes, we tend to go, James. A few years later, we already have in place hate speech laws and these sorts of touchy-feely, no crime actually being committed laws are coming into Australia exactly as they did in Britain.
JD Vance has been fiercely vocal about the UK's troubling departure from the liberal democratic values it once proudly upheld. His concerns are particularly focused on the country's abandonment of strong border security, a cornerstone of national sovereignty and stability. Vance argues that Britain, once a symbol of liberty and the rule of law, has strayed far from its foundational principles. In its place, he believes the UK is prioritizing political correctness and leniency, turning its back on the traditional values of justice and security that once defined the nation. For Vance, the failure to secure the UK's borders is the clearest sign of this disturbing shift, a move that puts the country's identity, security, and freedom at grave risk. What's even more alarming is that many in the UK share Vance's concerns. Public opinion is shifting, and citizens are increasingly frustrated with the country's lax immigration policies. There's a growing fear about the social and economic repercussions of an uncontrolled influx, and the demand for stronger border control is becoming impossible to ignore. Vance's message is resonating deeply with a population that feels Britain has lost its way, and it's clear they want change before it's too late.
There have been infringements on free speech that actually affect not just the British. Of course, what the British do in their own country is up to them, but also affect American technology companies and by extension American citizens. So that is something that we'll talk about today at lunch.
We've had free speech for a very, very long time in the United Kingdom, and it will last for a very, very long time. Well, no, I mean, certainly we wouldn't want to reach across US citizens, and we don't, and that's absolutely right. But in relation to free speech in the UK, I'm very proud of our history there.
For centuries, the principle that justice is blind has been a cornerstone of the UK's legal system, a guiding ideal that everyone should be treated equally before the law, regardless of race, gender, or background. Yet this foundational concept is being slowly eroded with the rise of identity-based sentencing. Now, factors like race, gender, and personal circumstances are influencing how individuals are sentenced. While the intention behind this shift may be to address past inequalities, it introduces an undeniable bias into the system, creating a situation where some individuals are given preferential treatment based purely on their identity. This shift directly undermines the core ideals of fairness and equality that the justice system is meant to uphold. When the law no longer applies equally to all, it threatens to unravel the very foundation of the legal system. For many, this is a dangerous departure from a society that once prided itself on impartiality, the belief that every individual, regardless of background, should face the same consequences for their actions. And this isn't just happening in the UK. Look to the US, and you'll see a troubling trend. Policies emerging that prioritize identity over the rule of law. Both countries are seeing the rise of laws that favor certain groups based on race, gender, or background. The growing concern is clear. The erosion of fundamental freedoms, particularly justice and free speech, is accelerating. Australia, too, is beginning to follow suit with the rise of hate speech laws and identity-based policies. What once seemed like an isolated issue in the UK and US is now becoming a global trend as more and more nations move away from traditional liberal democratic values in favor of divisive, identity-driven approaches. This shift could have far-reaching consequences for individual rights and the cohesion of societies worldwide. If left unchecked, we could see the foundations of fairness and equality crumble, leaving in their place a world divided by identity rather than unified by the rule of law.
Speaker, we've been preparing for all eventualities ahead of the confirmation of US tariffs later today. Let me be clear with the House. A trade war is in nobody's interests. And the country deserves, and we will take, a calm, pragmatic approach. That's why constructive talks are progressing to agree a wider economic prosperity deal with the US. That's why we're working with all industries and sectors likely to be impacted. Our decisions will always be guided by our national interest, and that's why we have prepared for all eventualities, and we will rule nothing out.
The UK's shift away from its core liberal values is a concerning trend, one that many, including J.D. Vance, believe threatens the principles of fairness, justice, and national security. As countries like the US and Australia move in a similar direction, the global implications are clear. It's time for a serious conversation about the future of liberal democracies and whether they can uphold the values they were built on. If you agree that the foundation of justice should remain equal for all, share this message and let's keep the conversation going. Like and share to spread the word. The